All right. Next up, we've got Andy.
So I'm not certain if what I'm going to talk about is actually right, but I'll do it anyway. Um, yeah, it's almost like I've got a fear-based procrastination going on at the moment. I'm in a job which I really just got this job because I needed a job. I've been in it way longer than I anticipated because of COVID. And I'm in this sort of cycle at the moment where I really want to move on and do something else, but I'm actually petrified to actually break free from this 9 to 5 job and do something where I'm sort of self-employed and doing stuff for myself. So what I'm doing is I'm creating obstacles before I even move, which means I'm not really moving.
Cool. We can do something
Yeah,
with
really, really cool.
that.
Really cool. Yeah, fucking great.
But no, you put it well. I got a pretty clear idea of what we're dealing with here. Again,
Yeah.
super common issue, I think. The percentage of people who are in a job that they are fully passionate about and would never leave for any amount of money has got to be in less than 10% of the population. So you're not alone. And the amount of people I've heard say, I'm going to get a new job when dot 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 made up excuse. I mean, I wouldn't need a job if I got paid for every time that somebody did that.
Yeah.
Um, so you got a shit job. You're procrastinating on leaving. You clearly believe that leaving and starting your own thing is, if not the right move, a better move than staying.
Yeah, it's like I'm taking responsibility for myself, rather than being sort of under the control of other people in an environment which is quite toxic. The place I work at is sort of overrun with Pentecostals and evangelicals who go to church and talk in tongues and do gay conversion therapy and stuff like that. So
Mm.
it's quite a radical sort of born again Christian type environment. And if you're not part of that, you basically get treated like shit. So yeah, I mean, I need to get out of that environment. I've tried to do something about changing it, but just got completely and utterly slammed down by the people in charge of the school I work in and the board of trustees. And the union is pretty fucking impotent, to say it mildly. So I'm now in a situation where I'm getting shit most days, and it becomes insurmountable, if you know what I mean.
I do, yeah. Okay. First off, frame this, the goal is clearly to be in a more responsible position in a healthy work environment, whether that's working for yourself or some other option that hasn't yet been considered.
Yeah,
And the current situation is eating shit every day simply because you're afraid to leave. Is that a fair
yeah,
submission?
yeah,
I'm going to approach this from a slightly different angle because, I mean, we covered so much with courage in the last thing that would still apply to this situation to some extent.
yeah.
But there are other, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat kind of thing. I want to approach this from a different angle. I want to imagine that in some way you've been tricked by your own mind into thinking you want to leave when actually you want to stay. When I say you want to stay, I don't mean that it's best for you or that you enjoy it or that's a good idea to stay, but some part of you prefers staying to the risk of leaving. It has made
Yeah.
the decision that eating shit here is worse than whatever other options there are, and so it will do everything it can. Tell me that part of you that's doing everything it can to keep you here. What does it want? Why is it doing this?
I think it's like it's a familiar shit, isn't it? It's like I have a diet of shit which I'm used to. So it's sort of probably to paraphrase it, it's better the shit you know than the shit you don't know, sort of stuff. So yeah, so it's a familiar shit that I'm used to. So it's quantifiable in a way. It's miserable. It's definitely not sort of fulfilling in any sort of way, and I have very little or no autonomy at work. But it's a familiar shit that I'm actually used to, rather than some unfamiliar shit that could happen somewhere along the line. So when I think of an unfamiliar shit or something unfamiliar, then my familiar sort of way of being in my sort of comfort zone uh, sort of comes up with problems about other things that could arise if I move. So it's tricking me to stay. It's amplifying things that don't even exist at the moment, like problems that don't even exist. It's
Mhm.
creating them, obstacles and stuff.
Right. Very normal human behavior, this, just so you know. I want you to notice a couple of things. One is, I want you to notice how you feel about the idea that the only reason you're staying is because it's familiar. Second thing I want you to notice, or I want to ask you is, what exactly unfamiliar would be worse than this?
Mm. It would have to be really fucking bad, eh? I guess unfamiliar would be something not working in the slightest, losing, having no money, probably losing the place I live, uh, which, to be honest, are pretty unlikely things to actually happen. So very little is actually worse, in a day-to-day existence than what I'm actually sort of participating in at the moment. Yeah.
Tell me, with your skills, your intelligence, whatever your strengths are you likely to allow something to get that bad? Or would you find a way to prevent
Uh,
it?
it's unlikely to happen, eh? I even know that. But then I sort of run back into my little sort of familiar sort of existence, if you know what I mean. So I like scuttle back into the environment I'm in at the moment. So I think, fuck, if it really gets bad, I can do this, this, and this. I know that because people have actually said, oh, could you come and do this for me or this type of job? And I say, yeah, of course I can. But what I'm doing is like I'm then thinking, fuck, what happens if they're not serious about this and it all falls to pieces and I don't get any money, I lose my home. So I scuttle back to actually the familiar environment I'm working in. Yeah.
Let's take that little narrative there because you skipped over like quite a few chapters in the story. You said, you try something, it falls apart, doesn't work out, and then you lose your home like right away. Like I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
like there
Yeah.
might be some steps in between those two.
Yeah. Just one or two, hey. Yeah.
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 So what you're telling me is that if you went and tried something new and it didn't work out, you would then do absolutely nothing about the unraveling that would follow. You would allow that to go untouched and unchallenged all the way through to losing your house. You wouldn't go get another 9 to 5 just in case. You wouldn't go for the benefit. You wouldn't ask people for a loan, nothing. You wouldn't do anything. You just let the world burn if your first thing that you tried didn't go exactly to plan.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that what you'd do?
No, but I think what I'm doing is like, because I'm sort of languishing around and procrastinating so much, and the sort of state of flux, I'm almost projecting the state of flux I'm in at the moment into other situations, if that makes sense. So, because I've got this thing where I do need to change my employment and I'm not doing it, it's like I'm procrastinating in a major sort of way. And I think what I'm doing is I'm projecting that into saying, well, if this doesn't work, everything's going to fail. So I'm sort of taking my procrastination that I have now and placing it into new environments along the way.
It's a pretty effective tool to get you to stay the same, isn't it? That projection.
It's done really well. So, yeah,
So you being this useless person who doesn't get shit done, tell me how have
yeah.
you survived this long? How is it that we're having a call from your house? How have you gotten here if you're this useless?
Yeah, because it's not true.
Because it's not fucking true.
I, because it's not true. Yeah, it's definitely not true.
So the real reason that you're staying at this job is because you believe a lie that you tell yourself.
Yeah, that's basically what's happened. Yeah.
Now, the foregoing conclusion is that you leave this job. There's no way you retire at this workplace, is there?
No.
So, how long do you want to leave it?
The change has got to happen this year before the end of the year. There's one or two things I had to sort out, like things like New Zealand citizenship, redoing my sort of registration for my job. So if the shit doesn't hit the fan, I can go back to it, which I've almost done. And then I had some money stuck in the UK, which has took 4 years to get, and that's just about to arrive. But it needs to happen. It needs to be happening like yeah, at the end of the year is probably too long, to be honest, with the way I feel about my work environment. So I would say sometime around sort of August, September, I need to, if I haven't got a definite plan to have actually be leaving in the next few months, I need to be almost like just resigning and actually giving myself the time and the space to look for other jobs and other things to do. If the worst comes to the worst, I can get jobs like just to tide myself over for a period of time, which even though they would be boring, when I finish those jobs, I would have had space to actually do and look for new things. Whereas in this place at the moment, I definitely bring the job home and the stuff that goes like with a job home with me. So it's sort of taking away time when I should be actually searching out and doing other things to do. But it needs to be the latest at the end of this year. I would need to have handed in my notice for this job and not be going back next year.
I'll be blunt with you. What you just told me is a story that you believe about why you can't do it right now.
Yeah.
A story that is not true.
Yeah.
See, fear, it only has to do one thing, and it puts all its resources into doing this one thing: delay. It can put all its resources, all its immense, which are all your resources. That's why you feel so burned out. Stress is using up,
Yeah.
all your systems being put into coming up with the perfect narrative. Every time you're concerned about your job, every time you want to leave, your fear goes into overdrive to come up with the perfect story to say, not now. In fact, the perfect story is, I promise we'll do it later.
Yeah.
I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that you could walk off this job tomorrow and the rest of your life will be fine.
Yeah.
No doubt. And that whatever the complications are from you just walking out like that, whatever difficulties arise, I have no doubt that they would not be as bad as being at the job. More importantly, I have no doubt that you could handle it.
Yeah.
What's really tragic about watching you is seeing, and I've met you before, I know a bit more about you than just this call. It's like watching a strong man talk about how weak he is. It's like, I know that this is like walking away from this job and just finding something else, even if it's not your dream, but something temporary in the middle to like transition away from the shit and recover and get your shit together. Like, that's piss easy for someone like you to do that.
Yeah.
Walk in the park. I know your backstory. You're a survivor. You're a fucking ingenuist. That's not a word. You know what I mean.
Yeah. No, it's a
You're
good word.
someone that you
Yeah.
spin the shit into gold. You've been doing it your whole life, and now you're telling me you can't do it with this thing.
Yeah.
It's total crap.
Yeah, it is. And I'm putting it off. And I put it off last year, and now I'm putting it off to the end of this year as well. You're quite right. So I'm sort of telling myself a lie, hey, about oh, I need to do it. I need to do this, this, and this, because nothing's ever going to be the perfect time apart from the time I do it. So I just need to do it.
Let me ask you this. This isn't a hypothetical question. Okay, I don't know what the answer is. You can just be honest. You don't have to tell me what I want to hear, you know?
Yeah,
The story is that you feel that if you do leave this thing urgently and immediately, as you know you should, that you're going to panic and stress out and things will be very difficult for you and it's going to be very unpleasant. Truthfully, I want you to imagine that moment where you do whatever it is that officially resigns. Maybe it's you hand them a letter, maybe it's a phone call. You say a thing and you know that you've burned the bridge. It's over now. It can't
yeah.
be undone. Once you imagine that that moment's just happened, and then you go home and you're sitting there and you just go, fuck, I've done it. It's over. What is that going to feel like for you?
Definitely a feeling of euphoria, like when you finish anything that you are not into. But I also feel that I'd have a lot of energy to actually find something else. So that thought of putting myself into the situation where I've done it, I've quit, I then feel a huge release, and it's sort of cleared up my head to do the things that I need to do. Whereas as long as I stay in that situation, I'm going to allow it to fill up my head with things. Therefore, I'm not going to. It's almost I'm like trying to look for things, but I'm not. I'm kidding myself that I'm preparing myself to leave my job and to get a new one, but I'm actually not doing that. I'm actually lying to myself, hey. But the thought of actually handing in my notice for this job, uh, I just have a feeling of being free and having a clear head to actually do things properly. Yeah,
So, almost literally, you can push a button for a feeling of euphoria and freedom.
yeah,
That's how easy it is for you to just have this massive uplifting in your life. Just like that, you can push a button.
yeah,
You know, I want to point something out. You talk about this job like it's familiar. Yeah, it's clearly one of the worst jobs you've ever had, right?
yeah,
So it's not actually that familiar. It's unusually bad.
yeah. I guess if I'd had it sort of done a job like this all my life, I'd probably be used to dealing with that, but I'm not.
This isn't even familiar for you. This is just horrible.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Let's get practical. What we need is for you to be at the right time, the right place. And what I mean by that is if you get the brave moment where you see that it's time to leave, you need to be able to in that moment. What I want you to do is I want you to type out your resignation letter,
Yeah,
fold it up, sign it, put it in an envelope, and your only job is to keep that envelope on you at all times. And if at
yeah,
any moment you get that surge where you go, enough, I want that feeling of euphoria, I want that freedom, I've only got one life, I don't want another second of this. As soon as that moment hits you, you can just whip it out of your pocket and just give it to them and walk away.
yeah. That's brilliant. Yeah, definitely do that. In
And
fact,
when
I'll
you're
do it now when this is finished.
no better time.
Yeah,
That's it. Just have that letter on you. Be ready to just
yeah, I will.
impulse this thing. Look, I'll be really straight with you. If I thought you were an incapable person, and these people do exist, I work with them. There are certain people who I would say, look, let's just slowly find a different job and work on bits and pieces, because if you just walk out of this, your life's going to come crashing down. You'll be homeless. There are people like that. You're not even close to that. You're at the other end of the spectrum. Innovative, resourceful, creative, survivor. You've got so many like wisdom, strength, safety nets that for you to end up homeless, you'd have to want to,
Yeah,
right? So I have no fear about you taking this. You could just not show up. You could ghost this fucking job and you'll still figure out.
That's fucking tempting, to do that today.
You really could. Get yourself fired.
Never show up. Never show up again,
Oh, not like
Yeah.
you don't even need a reference from these fuckers, you know?
I wouldn't get one anyway, so it's all right. I don't need one,
Christ, you might
Yeah.
even have a case for constructive dismissal.
Not in New Zealand with the labour laws and the piss weak unions. It's a waste of fucking energy,
Probably. I
I
think
think it's just best to fucking look at creating something new rather than fighting about the past.
tell you what, when you
Yeah,
get all that effort back, all that effort you're putting into procrastinating, and you get it back to do other shit, it's going to be like you have a whole army.
yeah. I can feel it now, Just that sort of shift. I've been going around in a fucking circle for the last 2 months, really quite fucking severely, but I feel like I've broken out the circle now, and I'm going to write my letter of resignation as soon as this is over, before I go to work, and then I'm going to carry it around with me and put it in an envelope, and just leave a place to put a new date on it, and then hand it in.
Then you're ready.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Guys, I want to give everybody a little challenge. The theme today is obviously being courage, taking actions that your body seems to not want to take, even though every single consideration of the behavior seems like a good idea, you know. I want you to set up some sort of, say, reminder in your phone, an alarm or something, to go off randomly 3 times in the next week. Just choose a random time that will hit you at like different situations, like once at work, maybe once when you're hanging with your friends, another time when you're fucking around on the weekend. And I want the question to be this: if I just found out the doctors told me I've only got 12 months to live, how would I feel about what I've been doing today?
Mm.
Can you know what courage really is? It's about identifying what you really should be afraid of and running away from that. Courage is just smart fear, right? Or the fear of being the same when the same is shit. It's something you should be terrified of. It's fucking miserable. So you should be scared of that and panicking and going in the other direction, which is actually like growth and healthy behavior and valued living and all the shit that makes you proud of yourself. Fearless is apathy. Fearless is you don't give a shit. That doesn't move you. You know? Fear is perfectly motivational. There's nothing wrong with fear. It's when you're afraid of the wrong thing that your life goes to shit.
Yeah.
Or more afraid of the wrong thing than you are of the right thing, you know, or however that's supposed to be worded. I really need more sleep. So thank you guys so much for showing up. I appreciate that. And I'll see you guys all next time.